Hey, greetings, friends. This is our first Friday of You Have a Question, I Have an Answer experiment. We'll see. We'll see how long we last. But I thought this would be a fun way to have a more dynamic element to our course and to our learning experience. And so I have two questions that came in this week. We'll see if we can keep them as short as possible in our answers. The first is from Kim Powell, and her question is this: why does it matter? She says, this isn't pejorative, like when kids ask about learning multiplication tables. Why have academics, theologians, philosophers, artists, and other thinkers down through time given so much to the study of the ideas within the intersection of art, beauty, creativity, theology, vocation, and worship? What makes these elements, when combined, unique, worthy, weighted with importance to the knowledge and understanding of a triune God and the lived experience of Christian personhood? Looking back to the Greco-Roman philosophy and early thought on aesthetics and beauty offers a partial set of clues. The same with church history and systematic theology. So far, I haven't found a satisfying answer about why it matters, only that it matters. I think it's a really, really good question. I'm not sure if I have an easy or straightforward answer, but let me attempt the beginning of an answer. And it goes something like this. When you take the aesthetic dimension of the world, the aesthetic dimension of human life, the aesthetic dimension of the cosmos, as it were, and you bring it into exchange or a marriage or a compound between creation itself and culture making. That is, when you take the stuff of the world, of the cosmos, of all creation, and you then bring it into exchange with culture making, that is what human beings make of the world, and then you focus in, or you attend to, or you reckon with the aesthetic dimension of these two worlds coming together, then what you simply get is the world of human beings, the world of sentient creatures, the world of personal beings who make something of this physical universe, this physical, sensory, aesthetically shaped, conditioned, oriented, natured realm, dimension. That is, put otherwise, behind me you see the physical world. You see evidence of trees and bushes, and you might be able to see flowers and so on and so forth. And well, in front of me you see a garden. I can see a garden. So you take all that, and then you take what human beings do with all of that. Their charge is to till and to tend the world that God has made. And what you get is this shape of life that is fundamentally aesthetic. My shirt, my shirts, my glasses, my beard, my hair, my shoes, my house, my phone, my car, my books, my music, my prayers, everything. The way that I imagine the world, the way that I feel the world, all of it has this aesthetic dimension. And the arts are taking this aesthetic data, the data of the sensory, the emotional, the imaginative, the metaphoric, and repurposing it in intentional and intensive ways. So, okay, said otherwise, artists are powerful. They exercise an extraordinary power in how we envision and live in the world. So you take something like flowers and trees and grasses and so on and so forth, water, and then you marry it to culture making, and depending on your cultural or human context, you might get Japanese gardens or English gardens. And those two gardens are comprised of essentially the same kind of stuffs of physical worth, the earth, trees and bushes and flowers and paths and dirt and those kinds of things. But they have reshaped them in very specific cultural ways, and they have made use of artistic work, artistic labors, artistic things. They have imagined a way of being in the world that is rather distinctive, rather radically different. If you've ever been in a Japanese garden versus an English garden, you see that an individual and communal identity is being established and perpetuated. And to be Japanese is in some sense interchangeable or inextricable to a Japanese garden, this physical manifestation. And I think God would say that's a good thing, that there be this diversity, this variety, not just in the physical world, but in the human world and the world that humans make, that has this aesthetic and then more particularly this artistic shape. It matters because it's the kind of world that God wants to exist. I'm not sure there is a better way to say that. But the world that God made and put into motion is a world that would have an aesthetic and artistic shape, because that's the kind of human beings he wants to exist. And those are the kinds of human beings that will continue to exist in the new creation forever. And you see that hinted at in the language of the book of Revelation, the kind of aesthetic and artistically shaped worlds that God wants to make possible, where artists are in the business of helping us to imagine the world in certain ways, to feel the world in certain ways, to be in the world in certain ways, and to understand ourselves through these metaphor-rich, dense ways. That there is no other way to be human being in the world, in the same way that there is no other way for Jesus to explain himself, as it were, except through metaphors, because he chooses this kind of language to exist, and for it to exist as an intrinsic good, not as an excuse or a forerunner or provisional way of speaking about things. You could speak of more plainly or propositionally. So he tells stories because that is actually a true way of being human in the world, not because he's telling stories because there's something else that he really wants to say. So I'm not sure if that has answered your question, but I guess I think I'm going to land there. There is no other world that God wants to exist except for a world that has an aesthetic and artistic shape, both because God himself makes this world with this aesthetic condition, nature, and once humans are put into the world and are given these creative capacities, then they are in the business of reshaping the aesthetic data of the world. And then sometimes they do it in very specific artistic ways. And that is the good world that God chooses to exist. And there is no other good world that he would want to exist. Do things go wrong? Of course they do. But in the beginning and all through the end, this is the world that God wants to exist, because these are the very specific creatures, human creatures, that he has made to be in this certain way, as a reflection and a representation of himself supremely in Jesus. But we're in the business of doing things that are uniquely human, because that is the kind of creature that God has made us, and we have to be in the business of being faithful to this kind of creaturely identity and calling. Okay, Kim, I don't know if that answered your question, but that's going to be question and answer number one. Now I'm going to do Wendy Scott next.